At my sister's Christmas gala, I was introduced as the family failure. 10 minutes later, her father-in-law stood and said, "Director Mitchell, your $780 million community alliance is transforming America." My dad's glass slipped from his hand. Melissa froze beside the piano, and the room fell into the kind of silence that cuts through gold-leafed air. That was the moment my quiet revenge began, without a plan, without a threat. Just the truth, finally walking into the room with me. People always assume revenge means destruction, but mine was revelation. For years, my family called me the one who never made anything of herself. The sister with a Subaru and soft hands from charity work. They didn't know that while they were chasing dinner invitations and photo ops, I was rebuilding neighborhoods one paycheck at a time. I never corrected them. Silence was easier than begging to be seen. I grew up in a house where success had a dress code and compassion looked like weakness. My father, Thomas, believed influence was measured in titles. And my mother, Evelyn, in how many people said your name at a fundraiser. My sister Melissa mastered that game: early designer heels, perfect smiles, and a husband born into the Harrington dynasty. I was the exception that embarrassed them. The reminder that purpose doesn't sparkle. When the introductions ended that night, and every pair of eyes turned toward me, I didn't raise my voice or defend myself. I simply met their gaze and let the truth settle like smoke over fine crystal. I was done performing humility for people who confused kindness with failure. The revenge was already complete before anyone realized it had started. The call came on a Thursday evening. Calm and deliberate, like every lecture my mother had ever given. "Is no Ren," Evelyn began, her voice smooth but sharpened by control. "Melissa just wants everything to go perfectly this year. You know how important the Harringtons' Christmas gathering is." I let the silence hang until she added, "It might be better if you skip it. She's under a lot of pressure." I asked, "So I make her look bad by showing up?" And she sighed, as if patience were a currency I'd never earned. My father cut in from the background, his tone more transactional than emotional. "The Harringtons are powerful people. Lauren, we can't afford to appear casual. This is about presentation." I said. "You mean it's about not reminding them that your daughter works with construction crews instead of hedge funds?" He paused, then said, "You've chosen a modest path, and that's admirable. But the world doesn't reward modesty." I replied, "No. It rewards pretense." And I heard the click of his tongue, the old signal that the conversation had crossed into defiance. Evelyn tried to soften it, the way she always did when she wanted to sound reasonable. "You know, your sister has a lot riding on this marriage. You showing up in those plain clothes, talking about community projects, it confuses people. They won't understand your choices." I said, "They don't have to understand them." But she pressed on. "It's not about you, Lauren. It's about keeping the family's image intact." That word image landed heavier than any insult. I told her I'd think about it, even though I already knew what my answer meant. When I hung up, the air in my apartment felt heavier than the words we'd exchanged. I'd learned long ago that in my family, ambition wasn't about impact but about optics. They needed me small so their reflection could stay large. I stared at the city lights outside my window, the skyline glowing with stories of people who built without applause, and thought, maybe failure was just success they hadn't learned to recognize yet. Melissa called on a Sunday morning, her voice bright enough to sound rehearsed. "Lauren, I need to talk to you about Christmas," she began, pausing long enough for control to feel like grace. I said I assumed it was still at the Harrington estate, and she exhaled softly. "It is, but this year, maybe you should sit it out." I asked why, and she answered with the kind of politeness that cuts sharper than cruelty. "You know how the Harringtons are," she said. They respect success, ambition, excellence. You've chosen a different life, I told her. You mean a life that doesn't come with a private jet? She laughed once, brittle and quick. It's not about that. It's about presentation. You'd be uncomfortable there. Lauren, these people talk about markets, acquisitions, legacies. I just can't have you looking out of place. I said, out of place in a family I was born into? And the silence that followed told me everything. She softened her tone, the way she always did when she wanted to sound like she was saving me from myself. I'm doing this to protect you, she said. You'd hate the conversations. The attention. They wouldn't understand what you do. I replied. You mean helping people rebuild their lives? You're right. They probably wouldn't. She sighed. I just need them to see me as one of them. Don't make this harder, I said quietly. You're doing a fine job of that yourself. I won it. When the call ended, I didn't feel anger, just the familiar weight of recognition. In my family, exclusion was a language, and I'd been fluent for years. They measured worth in houses and surnames, and I was the misprint in their pedigree. Still, the irony pressed close. While they fought to stand near wealth, I was already standing beside it, quietly running an alliance the Harrington Foundation had funded for 4 years. I didn't need an invitation to the table. I was already feeding half the city they toasted over champagne. That night, I sat at my desk and opened a new message addressed to Richard Harrington. The cursor blinked like a quiet dare. I typed, I thought you should know. Melissa Grant is my sister. She just uninvited me from Christmas for being too ordinary. I stared at the words, then added nothing else, no defense. No bitterness. Just truth. The reply came the next morning. Short and measured. Understood. He wrote, Consider this an opportunity for perspective. That was all. No promise. No explanation. Yet it carried the calm authority of a man used to rearranging the world with a sentence. I read it twice. Aware that he didn't need to ask who I was, the work spoke louder than my last name ever could. I closed my laptop and leaned back, letting the quiet fill the room. There was no plan for revenge. No satisfaction, yet only the faint recognition that something had shifted. For years, I had been the invisible one. The background of Melissa's perfect frame. Now, without raising my voice, I had drawn a single, deliberate line through her illusion. Richard's message lingered in my mind. Clean and deliberate as a chess move. Opportunity for perspective. It wasn't an invitation, but it was enough. I understood what it meant before I let myself hope. I would attend Christmas not as the forgotten sister, but as the unspoken reminder that truth doesn't need permission to enter the room. The Harrington estate was all glass and silence when I arrived. The kind of place that didn't have to prove wealth because it was built into the walls. Richard greeted me at the door with a measured nod. Miss Mitchell, I'm glad you could join us, he said. And I replied, Thank you for inviting me. Behind him, voices drifted from the living room, Melissa's laugh, my mother's polished tone, the sound of people who had already decided what the evening would mean. When I stepped into the room, the conversation slowed. Melissa turned, the smile on her face cracking as recognition replaced grace. Lauren out, she said through her teeth. What are you doing here? I kept my voice even. Mr. Oxis. Harrington invited me. She blinked fast. Searching for control. That's impossible. You must be mistaken. Richard's voice cut in. Calm and final. No mistake. I wanted Lauren here. The room went still. And for a moment, no one breathed. Melissa's jaw tightened as she turned to him. I don't understand, she said. forcing a laugh. You invited my sister. He nodded. I did. She's the reason our foundation has reached more families than any other partner in the past decade. My father's voice broke the silence. Our Lauren? She works for a nonprofit, he said, his confusion landing like an apology. Richard looked at him directly. She doesn't work for one. Mr. Mitchell. She runs it. Ass. My mother tried to rescue the moment with a brittle laugh. Oh. There must be a mix-up. Lauren helps organize community programs. Isn't that right? Dear? I said. That's right. Mom. Though now we operate in 26 states and manage an annual budget of $780 million. The sound of her bracelet clinking was the only reply. Melissa shook her head, color rising in her cheeks. You're joking, she said. You can't possibly. I can. I interrupted. But you never asked. Daniel Harrington, still holding his wine glass, turned to his wife. You told me she was a caseworker, he said slowly. Melissa stared at him, her voice thinning. That's what she said she was. I met her eyes. No. That's what you decided I was. It was easier for you that way. Richard spoke again. Steady and deliberate. For 4 years. The Harrington Foundation has funded Lauren's alliance. It's one of our highest impact investments. 8. Patricia, seated at the end of the table, added softly. I serve on her advisory board. Her work has changed thousands of lives. The words landed like a quiet verdict. My father cleared his throat, trying to recover authority he no longer had. Lauren, why didn't you ever tell us? I said. Because you never asked about what I do. You only asked how much I make. Evelyn whispered. You could have been proud of this. I smiled. You had every chance to be. Wed. Melissa's voice cracked into the silence. You've humiliated me in front of my family. I said. No. Melissa. You did that yourself, when you built your worth on someone else's name. Her hand trembled as she set her glass down too hard. I just wanted them to see me as one of them. Richard looked at her with an expression that was neither anger nor pity. Melissa. Real belonging doesn't come from appearances. It comes from contribution. Dinner resumed. But the rhythm was broken. Richard turned to me once more and said, Lauren, would you tell us about the housing initiative you're launching? I nodded. We're expanding workforce programs nationwide, partnering with local unions and universities. The Harrington Foundation's support will help us reach 500,000 more people. My father stared at his plate. Melissa stared at me. I didn't gloat. Didn't smile because the point was never victory. The truth had simply walked into the room. And it didn't need applause to be seen. Melissa cornered me in the study before dessert, the door shutting with the precision of someone who had practiced control her entire life. Do you enjoy humiliating me? She asked, her voice trembling between rage and disbelief. I said, No. I just stopped protecting the version of me you made up. She took a step closer. You made me look like a liar in front of everyone. I met her eyes and said, You didn't need my help for that. 2. She folded her arms like a shield. You could have told me who you really were. I said, You never wanted to know. You were too busy making sure I stayed beneath you. She shook her head. That's not true. I answered. Then name one time you asked about my work instead of judging my salary. She opened her mouth, then closed it. The silence between us was louder than anything she could have said. Finally, she whispered, I married into money because I didn't know how else to matter. I said, Then start mattering for real. You have a degree, connections, and time. Use them. She looked away. You think it's that easy? I said. No. but pretending is harder. You've been performing so long you forgot how to be seen without applause. Her shoulders sagged. The performance unraveling. I just wanted to belong, she said. I answered. You can't belong to anything built on illusion. She wiped her eyes and said, You make it sound so simple. I said. It's not. But honesty costs less than envy. She gave a bitter laugh. I spent years chasing the right last name. And you built one out of your own. I told her. Reputation fades. Contribution lasts. For a moment, the anger drained from her face, leaving only exhaustion. She said quietly, I don't know who I am anymore. I told her. Good. That means you've stopped pretending. When she finally met my gaze again, it wasn't with hatred, but the first flicker of something fragile recognition that the truth had always been her only way back. After the dinner, Melissa found me near the coat room, her voice stripped of performance. I want to do something that actually matters, she said. Can I help at your alliance? I don't care where I start. I looked at her and said, You'll start where everyone does in the field. She nodded. So I'll earn it. I said, Exactly. That's the only way it counts. The following week, she showed up at the office with no makeup, hair tied back, ready to work. My staff watched her quietly, unsure if she'd last a day. I told them, She's here to learn, not to lead. For once. Melissa didn't argue. She took notes, carried boxes, asked questions like someone discovering gravity for the first time. A month later, our parents came to visit. My father spoke first. We've measured success by salary and status, he said. And we were wrong, my mother added. You built something we never understood. But we're proud now, I answered. Pride is easy once the world applauds it. Try it in silence next time. My father smiled faintly. We'll do better. For the first time, I believed him. By spring, Melissa had earned her place, coordinating outreach programs without using her last name as currency. When she said, I finally feel useful, I told her, You were always capable. You just needed the right audience. She laughed softly. Turns out it was never the Harringtons. And I said, No, it was the people who needed you to show up. A year later, the air between us had changed. Melissa still worked with the Alliance, now managing new community partnerships with steady confidence instead of rehearsed charm. One afternoon she said, Richard wants to expand the housing initiative to all 50 states. He's offering another $240 million. I smiled and answered, You helped make that happen. She shook her head. No. I just finally learned how to show up for something that matters. That December. Our family gathered at my townhouse for dinner. My father raised his glass first. To Lauren? He said. Who built something real? My mother added. And to Melissa, who learned that success isn't about belonging, it's about becoming. I said, and to both of you, for finally celebrating substance over show. Melissa laughed softly. I never thought we'd be sitting here like this. I replied. Neither did I. But truth has a way of clearing space. After they left, Melissa lingered by the door. Thank you for letting me start over, she said. You didn't have to, I told her. You earned it. Every morning you showed up, proved it. She nodded. I used to think power came from who noticed me. Now I know it's what I do when no one's watching. I said. That's the kind that lasts. When the house grew quiet again, I stood by the window and watched the city lights stretch beyond the horizon. I thought about how far we'd all come from pretending to matter to actually making meaning. The redemption hadn't been loud, but it was complete. In the end, I didn't need them to see me as successful. I just needed them to see clearly and finally. They did. Thank you for watching Lauren's story. If you've ever been underestimated or told your worth depended on someone else's definition of success, remember truth doesn't need to shout to be seen. Subscribe for more stories that honor quiet power, resilience, and the kind of revenge that comes with grace.